So, why are we talking about safeguarding? That's going to be the first question that we're going to be answering, hopefully. But before we get into that, I just want to introduce myself a little bit, and then Bronwyn also she really, really, really wishes that she could be here, and she sends all of her love and greetings to you guys. So that's Bronwyn. And her family, her husband, she's got her 3 sons, her daughter-in-law, and her granddaughter, Emma. My family is up there. Those are my parents and my husband. I'm currently located in the UK. No, I'm not. I'm currently located in the US. Bronwyn is in the UK. And I'm in the US right now. But I grew up. I'm a French-American dual citizen. So, you know, the complicated life of a TCK, right? So that's just a little bit about me. Again, like I said, I do this full time, so does Bronwyn. So that's just us. So if you ever have any questions about safeguarding and you reach out to Safeguarding's Teach Beyond Safeguarding team, it's us, that's who you're getting. So hopefully that helps you feel a little bit more confident in who you're reaching out to when you're emailing Safeguarding. So, this is a commonly known South African proverb, as I understand, and it's certainly true globally. A happy, laughing child certainly lights up any room of a house, and I mean, when you're thinking of the children that you know, are they generally happy? Yes? Why are those children that you're interacting with happy? What makes a kid happy?
Secure.
Yeah, definitely. Security.
Or love.
Love. Yeah.
Have their basic needs met.
Absolutely. Yeah, that kind of sense of, we're gonna briefly touch on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but yeah, definitely those base needs being met, for sure. Yeah, I mean, then when you get into how can a child thrive and be happy, you know, we get into they're respected, they're listened to, right? Like they're able to grow spiritually and educationally. So having a positive sense of self, including being valued by others and having a positive, including being valued by others and being able to take time out and having your own space to reflect. Those are other things that can make children happy and help children grow. I'm just basing all of this off, just so you know, Bronwyn did make all of these presentations, and so I'm gonna be adding my own flavor to it, but if I'm stumbling a little bit, it's just because I'm not the one who created this. So just so you know. So yeah, she really wanted to incorporate a lot of African proverbs in this because that's what's relevant to you. So I think all of us have probably heard it takes a village to raise a child. What does that say to you? What does that mean to you?
It's a community effort. Everybody participates. Everybody takes responsibility of it.
Yeah, definitely. Everyone has responsibility for the well-being of children. That's exactly, yeah.
And you really notice it in Africa where everybody is either mama, papa, and or uncle, much more than in the West.
Yes. Yeah.
I recently learned something that was really fascinating to me, and that is that in previous, hundreds of years ago, it was 4 adults for 1 child. That was the ratio.
Wow.
And so they were saying, especially in contexts like in North America, where we don't have a community to raise a child, that a child really used to have 4 adults for 1 child. So I think that's a strength maybe in Africa.
It is. And we're going to be talking a little bit about protective factors and risk factors later on, and that's a protective factor, right? But yeah, so we need to make sure that there are multiple adults there, and you guys are a part of that, right? And being a part of allowing kids to experience and grow in a safe and healthy environment. So, on the other hand, the child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. What does that say to you? What does that mean to you? Yeah.
thought it was included, it says it takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah.
So I'm sure if a child is not raised by people, it can be
Yeah, yeah.
First, for me, who doesn't hear very well, when somebody responds, could you repeat what they said? for the rest of us to
Yeah,
hear?
she was saying, well, if it takes a whole village and then it's not, like, then they don't feel that they're being cared for well, then that's going to cause problems, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, what else?
But there's a reason behind behaviors that sometimes seem destructive, that there's a reason for that.
Almost word for word what I was going to say. Yeah, when a child doesn't receive the love and care that they need from their family or from their community, they may resort to destructive behaviors to feel seen and heard, right? Why might, I mean, again, how could that lead, how could those things lead to problems in your community? Yeah.
Rejection would lead to bitterness, because not being embraced is actually a part of rejection.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
child will be bitter, and from that bitterness, will do anything to get feel embraced. Maybe even join another group of people. Yeah.
Yeah, so feeling bitter about being rejected, yeah, definitely. Yeah. So talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? As people within open schools, so this, I'm just kind of flying through an introduction of safeguarding and why we need to be talking about this before I get into your specific context. But again, I know that we're all coming from different places, and so I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page about, okay, this is what we're actually talking about here. So again, we need to make sure that people have their physiological needs met first, right? That's food, sleep, like shelter, those kinds of things. And then safety and security. How can we make sure that kids are safe? Again, you can do so much more digging just into this, but it's not until those base needs have been met that we can actually start seeing kids thrive, right? And that's our goal. We want to see kids thrive. And they aren't going to be able to thrive in isolation. You are all a part of that. And so it's not just, they're not just the individual, right? It's not just one person. It grows. It's the family and friends. It's your school and your community, right? And it gets bigger and bigger. And all of that is involved in helping a child thrive. And so this, well, that's awesome. It leads to protective, like that, those being a part of more than just themselves leads to protective factors and risk factors. So things that are going to help keep them safe and things that are going to put them more at risk of being harmed. So they're basically, these two ideas are basically the two main elements in the development of resilience. So when you encounter risk, how do you combat that risk? Or when you encounter issues, how do you combat that with those protective factors that you have? And the ideal is that every child has more protective factors than they have risk factors. That's the goal. And so just a quick, resilience is just such a huge part of being able to thrive as a child. And so resilience is generally referred to as the ability to bounce back from adversity, and that's going to lead to well-being for children. So that's kind of what we're talking about here.
Alison,
Yeah.
and within this idea of protective factors, this would be what we saw in the previous slide on Maslow's kind of.
Yeah, exactly. Like if they have these base needs met, there are also, but then there's also additional protective factors, right? Like having a strong sense of community and you know, right? Like the higher up you get, like there are different kinds of protective factors, right?
Okay.
So we're, it looks different, but yes, for sure, like having a place to stay, that's a protective factor, right? Yeah. So we're gonna start with a story. So can someone read this out for me, please? You're gonna hear me talk about it, so.
Is it Joa?
Yeah.
Joa is 8 years old. He lived with his mother and very elderly grandparents in a simple one-room dwelling. They had no electricity or running water in the home and relied on the village well. His father had died when he was 4 years old. Joa often had to rely on neighbors for food. Joa had one t-shirt and one pair of shorts and often felt cold at night. His mother suffered from addictive behaviors and often spent the family money on alcohol. His elderly grandparents showed him love, but were very frail, so were unable to work and provide for Joa's needs. There is no school for Joa to attend.
So let's talk about what are protective factors, what are risk factors. Let's start, what are some risk factors that you're seeing?
Addiction.
Yep.
Single parent.
Yep.
No, relying on neighbors for food is maybe not the best situation.
True.
Health with no running water.
Yeah. Yeah, no running water, no electricity. Those are risk factors.
Being cold at night.
Yeah, health. Yeah, being cold, yeah.
No
School,
father figure.
no education. I mean, yes.
No father figure.
No father figure. Yeah, like a single parent household with that within that no father figure. I mean, maybe his grandparent, his grandfather can step into that, but that's not, he's frail, right? So like, we don't really know.
No school.
Yeah, no school. There are a lot of risk factors in this situation. I can think of 2-ish protective factors. Can you spot them?
Grandparents.
Yep, that's,
They show
Neighbors.
yeah, and the neighbors, yes, exactly. So even though it's not great that he's relying on food, on the neighbors for food,
Yes.
the fact that he has neighbors who care enough to give him some food,
Yes.
that is a protective factor. And the grandparents are the other protective factor.
Would it also the fact that he actually did have a dwelling to live in?
That's, yes,
He does have
possibly.
shelter.
Yeah, that's true. He does have shelter, but obviously there's a lot lacking from that. So there are clearly way more risk factors than we would want, and then there are protective factors. But what if we just change this story a little bit? So the first paragraph is the same, except for the last sentence. Can someone read the second paragraph for me?
Joa attended a Christian school. He loved school. His teacher was kind and taught him well, and often praised him for his hard work and prayed with him most days. The school provided him a good meal every lunchtime. Joa loved learning new skills and excelled in math. Joa had a good small group of friends who enjoyed studying and playing football together.
Soccer for those of us Americans in here.
I just couldn't say it, sorry.
I know. Yeah. Great. So, what are some of the protective factors that now jump in? Yep.
Community with good friends.
Mm-hmm.
Stable food supply.
Yeah.
Being discipled.
Yeah. Being discipled.
Wow.
His character, another.
Yeah. Predictable, reliable, consistent, loving caretaker in the teacher. Yeah.
Be able to play football and have
Yeah.
friends.
Yeah. Being able to have friends, like being able to get out of the house and like meet people. Yeah, that's huge. So you can see the difference. So how is Jesus being reflected by this school and this teacher? What does this teach Joa about Jesus?
Safe.
Yeah, he's safe.
Reliable.
Reliable.
He cares.
Cares.
But he's valuable.
Yeah. The Joa is valuable. Yeah. Compassion. Consistency. Yeah, exactly. And so this is who you are for these kids. This is a part of this can be who you are for these kids. Now let's take the same scenario and change it just a little bit once more. So same first paragraph, different second paragraph. Can someone read that for me?
Joe attended a Christian school, but his teacher was mean and often shamed and mocked him for his dirty clothes. The other teachers saw what was happening and did nothing. As a result, his classmates shunned Joa and had nothing to do with him. Joa struggled to learn and felt hopeless.
So again, coming back to risk factors. We're adding some protective factors with the school, but we're also adding more risk factors, right? So how is this reflecting Jesus?
It's hypocritical.
Shaming,
yeah.
mocking.
Yeah, that Jesus is someone who's going to make fun of him because he doesn't have clean clothes.
Being excluded.
Yeah, that Jesus is doesn't want him, is excluding him. Yeah.
He's unworthy.
Yeah, that he's unworthy of love or of Jesus's, whatever that looks like for him. Yeah, and so I just want to clearly show, and then this next quote is also just going to try and explain again how much impact you guys have. You have so much impact on these children. And that is such an opportunity and a blessing, but that means that we have such an intense responsibility to care for these kids well, because that is that's at the end of the day, we need to be reflecting Jesus well. And we're going to talk about some practical things in a minute, but so this quote is actually by a fellow child safety worker. She works for Pioneers, but we can't say we follow Jesus unless we are caring well for children. We can't say we are Christ-centered without creating safe environments where children have access to Jesus. So in your context, in your open school context, in your Beyond Borders context, in your Sparrow Project context, wherever you're coming from, are you creating safe environments for children? How can you tell if you're creating safe environments for children? Do you ask children in their school, in your school, how they feel? I'm open to answers for any of those. Like, so do you know how to tell when a school is a safe environment, or when a location is a safe environment for kids? What are some?
They would be happy to come back.
Kids want to come back. Yeah.
I think they also feel safe to have a variety of emotions.
A variety of emotions are acceptable in the context. Yeah.
I think it's also an environment which promotes their expression of whatever they feel.
Yeah. It's actually promoting feeling those emotions and promoting allowing them. Like it's actively promoting that, not just that they're comfortable. Yeah, definitely. Have you guys ever asked if the children in your projects or in your schools, if they feel safe? Is that anything that anyone's done before? It's okay if you have. Yeah.
I can say I would come back and forth to visit the project, and so it was really obvious to me that the children felt safe there by watching them interact with their teachers and like as an observer coming in.
Yeah, definitely. Seeing things as an outside observer can help give you a different view. Right? Yeah, definitely. So just to really emphasize, in case you weren't sure, schools in your context, whether it's schools or open schools or whatever that looks like, play such an essential role in protecting children from abuse, because they are in regular contact with children and young people. And so you're the people who can spot signs of harm, who can spot those things. And now you're working with children who are probably exhibiting a lot of signs of harm, right? And like I understand that, but it's like, okay, like that's all the more reason that you should be aware of these things and how to address them, right? So, yeah, again, and again, even more so when they're Christian teachers. So, yeah, these are more reasons why teachers are so crucial. Yeah, you might be the only reliable adult in a child's life who they feel they can talk to. You, as whether you're in a school or not, you do have a legal responsibility. So we place all of our foundation is biblical and ethical, right? But there's also that legal part, and so we have all three of those are important, and we need to address all of those. And you guys have a unique opportunity to advocate for children. And then lastly, a positive relationship with a supporting adult may enhance the resiliency of children who have been abused, are at risk for being abused, or live in a home where no maltreatment occurs, but the family experiences other problems, like insert risk factors here, like any risk factors that you can think of. So there are three components to a child safety program or a safeguarding program. So when I'm talking about safeguarding, I just realized that I didn't mention this. When I'm talking about safeguarding, I'm talking about child safety, child protection, whatever terms you're comfortable using, that's what I'm talking about. We call it safeguarding within Teach Beyond because we include vulnerable adults in our definition, but I just wanted to mention that. So the three main things for a safeguarding program is training, policy, and compliance. Let's say that up. Policy, training, and compliance in that order, really. So if you think of it as a triangle where if I had string, I would, have one of you hold, three corners, and if one of you lets go, it's not a triangle anymore, it's so thinking about, okay, this is what we need we need all three to be able to maintain a good program. So even though teachers are so crucial, they need more than just teachers. They need these three things. And we need to train people and you guys based on a policy. And we need something that is going to then be based, again, with accountability and compliance. So when we say compliance, we're also talking about accountability, right? That's the main thing. It's like, okay, we have this policy, you've been trained on it, and now you're agreeing to it, and someone's holding you to that. So that's what we're talking about. Because it would be great if a school has an excellent policy, like the best policy in the whole world, written just for them, and exactly none of their teachers know about it, right? Like how useful is that? You can have great training, but then it's not based on any policy, and so then people are like, wait, what am I supposed to do? And they can't go back to anything. They can't say, oh, this is where it's written, I know what I'm doing. So there's no consistency then. And then, lastly, if you've got a teacher who's gonna breach the policy and code of conduct and cause harm and attended training under a policy but never signed anything, how are you supposed to let that person go, or how are you supposed to address those conduct concerns when there isn't any recourse for you? You haven't built anything in legally. So I know that this might sound like a lot. We do have some resources for you. If you want, I can also send you guys the link, but this is a Teams page. It has some resources for leaders within Teach Beyond. This is some Teach Beyond specific stuff, but we also have some additional things. We have a whole webinar series on how to develop a safeguarding program. If that is something that you are interested in or want to know more about, you can feel free to access this. And there, you can just it's just more resources for you if you want them. And we're here to support you. If you walk away with anything, hopefully you can walk away with, we're here to help. But even though we're here to help, what would happen if we just gave you a policy pre-made and just said, here, use this in every single context that you are all working in. Just use that and it will be fine. Well, if you want to go, it will go fast. You'll have a policy in place, but you're not going to go far. And so we need to work together. We can help you develop, policies and programs and all of this together. But we want to make sure that you are involved in developing and the training. So all of this conversation that we're going to be having today and tomorrow, this is why I want it to be super interactive, because you guys are the ones who are going to be implementing this and figuring out what that looks like in your context. So you need to say, actually this scenario doesn't make any sense, or actually this bit we need to change, we need to do, because I want you guys invested in the training that you're going to be giving to your people, whatever that looks like. I want you guys to feel like, man, this is the best training that we could possibly give for our context. So that's the goal. If you're building a house and a nail breaks, do you stop building or do you change the nail? You change the nail, right? Like we're not just gonna give you a template and then, or a policy pre-made. We're gonna make sure that we can, because it's gonna be a broken nail. We're gonna change the nail so that we can develop that policy. I am going to, I have until 3:30. Dana, do I have until 3:30?
Let me check, I think so.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, amazing. Sorry. Okay, perfect. Great.
We're actually speeding up this.
I might come back to this later, but for now, I want to start working on through the, if you've got 6 safeguarding lessons for vulnerable contexts, that's what we're going to be working through. And it is going to be, so I'm going to pretend to be training you. So you guys are your, whatever context you're in, you guys are your educators, your tutors, whatever that looks like. But you're also, I want you to have kind of 2 hats on at the same time. So, yeah, two hats. So you're your own educators, and then you're also yourselves and asking questions about how can I train my people. So if I understand correctly, this is a video, or this will have been a video. I'm just gonna stop showing this because great. So that it's not distracting. And so we have made a video. It still needs to be edited, but we've done this for open schools. But maybe we need to alter it, or maybe you need to do it live and not show a video. I don't know. So there are just 6 different kind of modules for talking to your people about, hey, this is why it's important, this is what we're expecting. So, again, we've got a video that's being edited. So I'm gonna start, and then again, I want you to be super interactive, ask questions as if you were your own people that you would be training, and then ask questions about how you can do this for yourselves, within your context. So, hello, my name is Allison. It's a pleasure to talk to you about how we can love, respect, and protect children in our schools. Why is it important to love, respect, and protect children? Let's start with a story in the Bible. This story is found in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, so clearly it's an important story in the Bible. In this story, Jesus is teaching a large crowd of people, and many people are trying to get to Jesus. Some people brought their little children to Jesus so he could touch them, but his followers told them to stop. When Jesus saw this, he was upset and said to them, "Let the little children come to me. Don't stop them, because the kingdom of God belongs to people who are like these children. I tell you the truth, you must accept the kingdom of God as if you were a little child, or you will never enter it." Then Jesus took the children in his arms, put his hands on them, and blessed them. So let's discuss these questions. Why did Jesus love, respect, and protect the children in this story? What are Jesus' motivations?
Show them their value.
Yeah, show them their value.
I think the point of the story is that Jesus was using the children as an object lesson about how we enter into the kingdom of God. I mean, I think that's the point too. I mean, like, you know, children, we can't, you know, like if they're young, they can't do anything, and the adult does everything. So it's kind of like the kingdom of God too. Like we come as helpless, and the Father has to do everything to help get us into the kingdom.
It's highlighting children's vulnerability. That's what it sounds like you're saying.
Yeah, right.
And that's which is true. But it also means, right, like that is all the more reason he also stood up for them and protected them, right? And so the kids are like vulnerable, and so Jesus is stepping up and doing that. Why do you think children are important to Jesus? Why do you think he cares in the first place?
Children are teachable, and they're able to receive when you speak into their lives.
Yeah.
Instructions.
Yeah, children are teachable, and so they're like, you can, I'm sorry if you heard that. Right.
I think the story is even more striking when we think that at that time, children were even less valued than they are today.
Yeah.
You know, they're really not considered at all.
Yeah, I mean, at this time, kids weren't even really considered at all, right? So how can Jesus is stepping in and saying, no, I care. It's because those children are also his children, right? Like, we're all God's children, and that is true of these vulnerable kids. These kids who can't, you know, who are vulnerable, who can't defend themselves or can't talk for themselves or whatever that looks like. That is so important to recognize. So, how are children stopped from coming to Jesus because of our behavior?
We shush them up.
We prevent them from talking. Like, we're just like, no, be quiet. How else?
You might teach them that they need to earn love and respect.
Making them think that they need to earn love and respect. Yeah.
I think also when their innocence is taken away, maybe because of abuse or exposure to some things that they're not supposed to be exposed to at that age.
Yeah, ripping away of innocence.
Being a really bad example.
Yeah.
So talking about Jesus and calling yourself a follower of Jesus, but then being opposite in nature to Jesus. Yeah. It might push them away. We've heard many people say, I wanted nothing to do with Jesus because this person said they were a follower of Jesus and they were selfish and abusive and mean and
Exactly. That's exactly. Harm can tell children, especially harm by Christians, by Christian teachers especially. I mean, that is so harmful. And obviously any harm is going to impact a child. But that kind of harm from people who are claiming to love Jesus, sometimes it brings them closer because God is an amazing God. But that can so easily hinder children from coming to God and from recognizing that God loves them and that God's there for them. And so making sure that we are not a part of that narrative, that we are a part of the people who are going to give life and speak Jesus into them is going to be the most important thing that we can do within that. So we need to remember how precious children are and how valuable their safety and well-being is. So how can you, as a tutor, show Jesus' love, respect, and protection for children?
I mean, like listening and then showing that they're worth, showing that they have worth, like listening to their stories and that, not like pulling them out even if their story might not make sense to you at the moment, just like evaluate what they say.
Yeah, taking the time to actually care about what they're saying and to actually value them and what they're trying to communicate, even if you don't get it in the moment. Yeah, what else?
Having humility and modeling for children what you do when you make mistakes and when you might unintentionally hurt them. Being willing to listen and to have humility and model.
Yeah.
What that looks like.
Admitting mistakes and being able to say, hey, I'm sorry I hurt you, I made a mistake, and owning up to that and coming to children about that. Yeah. Encouraging them to do better as well. Yeah. Yeah, that's showing that is showing value, right? Like you're saying you can be more. You can accomplish so much, and I can, obviously, within their age bracket and within, not pushing them like so that they're going to break, but yeah, encouraging them to be, because that's how we got to be, right? People are pushing us, and that's how we're getting to be, we're getting better and we're progressing.
Yeah, because that also helps them to improve on their confidence levels as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, increasing their confidence in themselves, yeah. Yeah.
Protecting and caring about them in their vulnerability and their being vulnerable.
Yeah. Acknowledging the vulnerability and protecting them because of that, like just by virtue of them being vulnerable.
Showing value for the vulnerability. Like Jesus said, he kind of turns the kingdom of God upside down and says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And I think helping children, and I think Jesus shows in the story too that he values those who are vulnerable, and that there's something to be valued in that place, and that like to show them who they are, what their identity is.
I think also for us as teachers, there's an element of validation. And I think we have to be very intentional about that from the perspective that in a classroom, for example, extrovert kids will naturally draw more attention from a teacher. So you have to think, how do you validate kids that might not be the first to give the answer, or not as charming, or as friendly, or not as cute, but it's still, from a Christian perspective, we need to make sure that they're equally being given attention and being validated.
Providing equity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. As a teacher, you have that power. You can, if you're pushing some kids and encouraging some kids, you got to be doing it with all of them, and doing it to their level, right? But you've got to be doing it for each one of them. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Suppose you have got 2 or 3 different kinds of children, others coming from, let me say, the family values. You find out that the family values are not the same, or the cultures are not the same.
Yeah.
So trying to accommodate them in a Christian value or in a Christian culture, even if others are from the Sangoma families, others from maybe families whereby there are no values.
Yeah.
So you try to accommodate them and make them to be one.
Yeah, modeling healthy values when kids are not coming from a home with family values, with good family values, and then kind of encouraging that coming, like making a base level for similar values so that we're all on the same page. Yeah, definitely.
Just one comment, I think as well, for me as a teacher, the question of routine. Outside of the classroom, children always adapting to us. We set the time, we set the routine, we set the tasks. In classroom, it should be an environment where they have the possibility to choose and set some of the rules and choose the dynamics of the classroom as well.
Yeah, offering choices to kids and allowing them to, empowering them. That's really what you're getting at. It's empowering those kids and allowing them to experience things that they maybe can't or don't experience in other contexts, whether that's at home or at church or whatever that looks like. Yeah, definitely. So that's our first scenario, or our first unit, right? It's why, like the base level of why is it important? How do you guys feel about that for bringing that home and implementing that? Do you guys feel like you could do that? What would you change? I want to hear suggestions. Would you change the whole?
I think it's good.
Thanks. Thanks, Dan.
And I would say that these are things that have to be revisited. You know, even when you're a teacher, intentional, you implement them from time to time. You have to go through checklists and think about your students and who you have, and who is your audience. Is so, yeah, you know, am I kind of getting things right? You know, am I doing the things that I intend to do? Am I implementing things into my classroom that I think are important? And are there things that maybe I would like to be implemented, but maybe I'm not even aware? And I think, again, even when we're thinking about those things intentionally, you're bound to forget something. So revisiting, going back, having people or training that remind you of the things that you need to be thinking about, I think it's always super helpful.
What are ways that that's going to happen within your Beyond Borders context? Like how can that actually, because you're right, ongoing, you know, regular, how, is there a practical way that you can think of?
Well, I think even
sure
obviously we've had, for example, thinking about safeguarding, you know, we've had bigger trainings and things, and I think there are always ways that you can break down ideas into small bites and make a sort of regular calendar and say, well, today we're going to talk about, you know, this week about this aspect, you know, and next week in a month's time we're going to look into something else, and just keep the subjects kind of, you know, bring them back again and again as an intentional understanding that they are important.
And you could make a list of subjects that's so long, you know, you can talk, because there are things, there's the why it's important, there's the kind of foundational bits, but then there's also, you know, we can get into the advanced things of grooming and what to do when someone is developing a relationship with a child intentionally to harm them. What happens then? What do we do to address that?
And I think, for example, in Lazarus, we've had situations in the camp, and naturally they prompt conversations with the teachers to say, okay, you know, if it happens next time, how do we want to deal with the situation? How we want to, you know, approach the kid or the children, you know, or resolve the brawl, or what are some of the elements that we would like to make sure that they're part of the classroom to minimize, you know, the potential of that situation kind of repeating. So I think in a sense we think of, you know, problematic situations as being something to avoid, but actually can be great learning places, because the teachers will remember the situation that they went through, and I think that kind of sparks implementation of good ideas.
Yeah, definitely. What else?
I'd like to give an example of one of the projects we went with. I trained high school children to reach out and go and work with children that were not at school. And this specific project was a place of safety. And the children, they were obviously taken away from the parents, so they're difficult. The hearings hadn't taken place. So when we got there, we'd stand in a circle and pray and sing with them. But they would just actually harm us. They would run around kicking us, just making it so difficult. And that's when we had to rethink, re-pray, regroup, and think, how can we show the love? And they were illiterate, they were varying of ages. And so what we did is we actually played with music and a soccer ball game or something like that. And through that, and then why do we have hands? How do we use our hands? Not in hurting, but in playing a game or playing soccer, catching the ball. But that took very, very long. The hurt, the abuse was so deep. But it was amazing to see how Uncle Alan knows when my blue bucky parked there, these children would come running, knowing after a year or two they started to trust us. But it's no quick fix, and obviously you've got to think out of the box, where sport and music were two things we found that you can relate and bring God's word and God's love just by playing with them and acknowledging, wow, good kick and something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to acknowledge that all of this stuff that we're talking about is great in idea, in principle. It's amazing. Actually getting this to work and be in practice in your in all of your contexts, that is not going to happen in a week. Like, I would love for you, I was talking, I don't remember with whom, but I was talking with someone, and they were saying, I really want to go home and like immediately like implement this stuff that I was learning, so that I don't, just sit on it and forget. That's awesome. Start it. But you're probably may not see change or effect for a year or more, 5 years, right? And this is a long-term commitment that we're talking about. This isn't like we now have a policy that's written and we're now training people and now everything's wonderful. It's much more of an ongoing project that we're talking about. And so I appreciate your commitment. Yeah.
Also, I think what would help to quicken this process would be to tie it in with some of the policies that are already maybe in place as a nation. And like for us, there are very strong policies against child abuse, and especially related to school environments. They even go up to jail sentences. So I think it helps people catch on quickly if you can relate also with that and bring in these aspects of how we need to take care of the children in a school environment or an educational environment.
No, absolutely. Like figuring out, okay, what's going to motivate, that's a part of it, right? What's going to motivate our staff or the people that we're working with? What's actually going to get them excited and involved in, whatever that looks like? Laws are a great way to motivate people. Not going to jail, that's a good motivator. So right, use what you've got, whatever that looks like. So I've been focusing a lot on the biblical motivation, right? There is a clear motivation biblically for keeping children safe. You're right, there are so many legal requirements and laws that are going to encourage people not to harm children. And there are plenty of other things that can, if you create a culture where people who are coming in, they're like, oh, I obviously see and recognize automatically that you value children and that you're not harming them. They're gonna want to, generally, people don't want to be countercultural, most of the time, unless they're specifically joining to harm children. They're going to join with and if you have a culture of this value and this protection for children, that's going to continue on. It takes a long time to create a culture and to form that. But once you've got that, you can keep that momentum. So that's just another thought. Yeah.
One thing we find as we work with refugees, a responsibility we have is to teach the parents that if they're going to get resettled to Europe or North America, they cannot hit their children or they may lose custody of their kids. So we've really had to teach that because it's not in their home countries.
Yeah, educating parents as well. That's actually a huge part of it. If the kids that you're working with have parents who are alive and present in their lives, it's important to actually work with those parents and connect them and say, hey, this is what we're doing for your kids. We want you to be a part of that too. Whatever that looks like. We want, here's why we're doing it. Here's why we care. Here's what you can do, encouraging that.
Yeah, I love this idea of establishing a culture because I have to say, so I'm in an administrative role in Teach Beyond and Beyond Borders, and there are so many people who say, why do we have to do another safeguarding training? I've already done my safeguarding training. So this is a common thing. I hate that I hear it, but I do hear it. And so I'm thinking we always do devotionals, right? Like we always, at every Teach Beyond, and I'm sure in other people's cultures, we always give time for devotional. So what if we create a culture where our devotionals are focused, you know, like where intentionally we say once a month, our devotional will be focused on how it's like
really good
a
idea.
biblical model, and then even do community nights with parents where we have, you know, the focus is a session on why is it important to love, respect, and protect our children. So the parents, I think in a lot of contexts that we work in, then they're learning at the same time, but then they're also learning like, oh, this is the place our kids come to. This is what they value. This is what's important. So I think that for us and Beyond Borders, that opens up a way to, like we always want to try to support the parents as much as we can and teach the parents. And I think that this could be completely creating a culture of safeguarding. So it's not like it's something we have to do and we tick the box and we don't have time for it.
Yeah, right, like so we do this, like the reason why things are so specific and we need signatures and we need, you know, to tick the boxes, that's because that's a legal requirement. And that's an important side of it, you know, that it is. But we are based on this biblical and ethical foundation. And so we can bring that about in our culture that we're creating in our projects. So yeah, definitely. So we've got some scenarios to work through. I think what I want to do is I want to work through one lesson and then one scenario. So we can just start with Peter. They're not necessarily, these scenarios aren't necessarily related to the specific sessions, the specific lessons, but it's a nice way to break it up. So that's probably how I would do it. So can someone read for me the first Peter's, not the questions, but just Peter's scenario.
Peter is 10 years old. He is an orphan. He lived with his grandmother until last year. Then she died. He lived on the streets in Bujumbura for 2 months, and then he got very sick. He was noticed by Mr. Lamini, a tutor. Mr. Lamini invited Pierre to his school.
Sorry, Peter.
Okay. Oh yeah, sorry, it's Peter.
No, that's typos.
And helped him find a home with a local family. Peter shares a room with 6 boys. Last night, 2 older boys, Eric and Henry, grabbed him and forced him to lie on the floor on his stomach while they pulled his shorts and underwear down. Then they sat on him like they were riding a donkey. They laughed at him. The other boys watched. Eric told Peter they do this to all the new boys. Eric told him that if he told anyone, then they would poison his food. Peter is ashamed and frightened. When he was on the streets, some older boys did bad things to him. He doesn't want to go back to the streets, but now he is thinking he will run away.
How do you help Peter, right? Like that's the ultimate question. So here are some questions to think about. I think the why, sometimes I know that this seems like an obvious question or an obvious answer to this question, but why was Peter in a weak position even before he came to the school, right? We've got to consider his background. We've got to consider where kids are coming from. I know that like in this scenario, it's like, well, obviously, right? Like, you know, he's experienced loss, he's been on the streets, he's dealing with so many different things. That's fair, but each child that we're interacting with is coming from a different place. And so we need to think about, okay, what is this kid, like what do I know of what this kid's been experiencing? What do I know of their background, their past? And how is this especially going to affect this child, whatever they're going through? Because when we're talking about the risk and the protective factors and risk factors, sometimes a protective factor can be a risk factor that they've gone through and come out the other side of. And they experience that, and they've experienced that resilience, right? And so some kids are actually going to be impacted less by the same thing that happens to someone else because they have these other protective factors that are insulating them against the impact of whatever's happening, right? So we want to make sure that we're increasing those protective factors as best as we can. And that's just, again, to pull it back to the risk and protective factors, because ultimately that's what it's all, it's juggling that and trying your best within your role to increase those protective factors and to limit those risk factors. A lot of times you have more control over the protective factors than you have over the risk factors. So, why do you think the boys chose Peter to do this to?
I have a feeling they were treated once like this.
It happened to them.
He's a new kid on the block.
New kid. Younger. New and young.
Please.
And he's been sick.
And and he's weaker. Yeah, he's been sick, he's weaker. Younger, weaker, newer. Those are all risk factors, right?
He doesn't appear to have too many connections, like friends with an orphan.
Yeah.
So he doesn't really have someone to support him, household, like a friend.
What consequences are there for these boys? Like for these older boys? Because Peter doesn't have any connections. He doesn't have friends who are gonna stick up for him. He just got there. He doesn't have any parents who are gonna do that. He doesn't have, he's new. He doesn't have any connections. So there isn't anything that would necessarily mean that these boys would have any consequences.
He also must figure that because it's happening, and supposedly it happens to all the boys, that the person who invited him to come knows this is happening and thinks it's happening. So the tutor that brought him in, that had no idea what was happening, might suddenly become blamed in this kid's eyes.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Or he might think that this is normal behavior and that the tutor's aware of it and it must be
It's not a
okay.
big deal. Yeah. So, but yeah, like how can we? So, if you're Mr. Dlamani and you had no idea that this was going on, how can you encourage Peter to come talk to you, and how can you encourage him to recognize that this isn't something that's normal? What can you think of anything?
Build a relationship with them so that they'll feel safe to talk to you.
Yes, build a relationship.
Explicitly tell him as you're dropping him off, hey, yes, please reach out to me.
Yeah.
If you feel unsafe here.
Yes, exactly. It's raising awareness. That's what needs to happen. Raising awareness in the kids that you're working with about, hey, this isn't good behavior. This isn't normal behavior. If something like this happens, come to me. Like, tell me. It's not normal. It's not good. I want to help. And so talking to all the kids that you're working with, saying, hey, if you experience X, Y, Z, these are harmful things. And it doesn't matter. There's tons of things that are culturally acceptable that are bad for kids.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if it's culturally acceptable or not. It's bad. Like, we can still address that. Like, for instance, in the UK, they were shoving kids up chimneys for hundreds of years, causing them lung damage to clean these chimneys. Well, that changed over the years because they realized, oh, this is harming children, but it took like hundreds of years for them to be like, oh, I guess we won't give kids lung cancer, So it's a long change, but that's what, right? It's just because that was happening doesn't mean that it's okay.
And I think as teachers as well, the way you prepare the kids to come to you, the language that you use also determines the level of openness. Because if you're aware that things have happened and are bound to happen again, then it's a different kind of approach than, hey, if ever anything happens, I'm here for you, which is this very low level of commitment of you as a teacher. If you're aware that things have been happening and are likely to happen. So I think that determines the approach that you would have also as a teacher.
Yeah, and doing that, it depends on your context. For some kids, saying like, oh, if anything happens, come to me, that's going to work.
Yeah.
For some kids, that's going to be like, that's not going to be enough. And so figuring out in your context how to best communicate that. And that means that you might have to have multiple conversations with different kids. And how do you do that when that's not your primary, like when you're also teaching and you're also educating teachers? How can you,
Yeah, I just asked Aspen a question. I'd love to hear more about this. That it's so important to raise awareness, but in a lot of cultures, like I'm thinking of Ethiopia, it's not spoken about. These kind of things aren't spoken about. So how do our teachers, how do you guys share with kids? How do you actually do that when it's something that in your culture feels shameful, you don't talk about it? So I'd love to just hear from.
Yeah, I mean, do you have any, I'm sorry to call you out, husband, but
Yeah,
do you have any ideas?
Yeah, in our culture, maybe it is difficult to share such kind of program to anyone. But as a teacher, just developing relationship with kids is big. Just they bring even in our organization. I have almost 21 kids before when I started open school. Also, all kids come up with their program to me, and they share me what is happening. So the big thing is just develop a relationship with the kids. Then they come every day and told me, even I shared you last time, something has happened to our kids, and also they come with that problem to share. Not the ladies, they choose me, and they are ladies. The girls, yeah. They come to me and the teacher, you want me, and you going to share you something that's happened going to me, to us. So can you help us? Then I, come in, go to my office and sit and hear them. That is what I'm doing is just I gave him my all hearts to them. So they come to the programs and we pull them. So in Ethiopia culture, it is difficult to share such kind of program to parents. So maybe if I ask you that last time, if you get such safeguarding training, so as a teacher, maybe we will train parents too, or our children's parents. Then maybe it will be proved through parents.
Yeah, and it's talking about, so it's building relationships. That's the sum up, but it's also talking about working towards changing culture as well. Because, and you can start changing that culture through building relationships, and by saying, okay, I want to talk about this. This is important. I recognize that this isn't culturally talked about, but because you and I have a relationship, I want to talk about this. Will you let me? Can we talk about this? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Muhammad from Uganda. I can relate very much to my friend from Ethiopia. Yeah, there's so much that is not talked about about in our culture. I mean, I find that from childhood we're raised like warriors. We're not supposed to show emotions or any point of vulnerability. But also when we are faced with these issues where children are being abused or they're going through like Peter's scenario, there is a position that we take as adults where we are the ones listening. Talk to me. And that only grows up our guard as adults. When do we talk to them about our vulnerability? When do they ever see us vulnerable? Because I feel like one place where we grow human relationship is tapping into our human experiences, where we've been hurt, how we felt when we were hurt. And when children start seeing us sharing this, they're able to, we unlock them to, because you can only trust someone who has been through almost a similar situation. So I just wanted to mention that, you know, as teachers, it's okay to stand up and say, I'm having a bad day. This is not working before your children. And then they can trust you with what they're going through. Oh, I also had a bad day. John, Alex did this to me and it made me feel so bad. So I think sharing our personal experiences gives them permission to also come out.
Yeah, it's, and here again, it's hard in these contexts. We're talking about changing culture is a big part of it, and sharing your vulnerability is a great example. That's also true in Western cultures, right? How many times are we telling guys like, oh, just don't cry, don't like, you don't need to have any feelings or be angry? It's true around the world. There are so many things that are true culturally that are problems around the world. Yeah.
I think it's quite exciting, and really, when talk about trying to change culture from a biblical worldview, it's always important to try and how do I apply the biblical principle, but to change the culture, working in some of our areas is so difficult. For instance, a child has been sexually abused by father, grandfather, child is 9 years old. So what happens? How do you change the culture of that? And in the context of that, the child has to leave the village because the child is blamed.
Yes.
And so the child has to leave that village. But how do you restore the child? And I think one of the ways of restoring is to be able to identify the child, bring the child in, and we have organizations, take them in and help them. We had a few months ago, child 9 years old give birth. Became a national thing in Zimbabwe. Where a 9-year-old child. So what happened? The 9-year-old child was being blamed for witchcraft and not for sexually abused. So the child was being bewitched. That's why the child is pregnant. So these are cultures that I think we face in our context. And sometimes, how do you apply that? How do you speak into that? How do you change it? And the only way is, in that case, in that scenario with that 9-year-old child, a pastor takes the child into their home, speaks into the child's life. And that became a national. What happened with that child became national, where the president's wife turned up. And what happened was an opportunity to have a voice, a biblical voice, to be able to speak into a nation, tell the nation that these are the atrocities that are taking place, but Christ is able to change the child's life. So when it comes to culture, in Africa it's so difficult because there's so many different cross references of things that take place in culture. In a place called Binga, we work with children. It's normal for a child at 9 to 12 years old to be married. And so how do you change those cultures? But slowly, because of just talking into and biblical worldview, speaking from the biblical perspective, we see now chiefs are beginning to change mindsets of child marriages. So it's quite interesting, but I'd like to say that it takes time and it's a process, but we see it changing slowly. And these are some of the contexts and these places that we work in where it's difficult. And when you see a child abuse, so in an open school program, if a child is, we pick up that the child is sexually being abused or something, there's protocols that got to be followed. You cannot just speak about it like they say. You can't just talk about it because the child will be endangered. And so many times even the family will keep it quiet. So there's a process of maybe going through different from the head to the chief to whatever it is. And so those are some of the things that are, maybe just to give you a scenario of the things that we face in Africa on a daily basis. And so in our programs, these are some of the things we pick up. Okay, Albert speaking something.
So it was really nice to hear that example, because I'm very curious to hear their experience on what their safeguarding policy looks like, what your training looks like, and how you engage with the chiefs and the leadership, because we've got churches there, but then the churches have been, within that region, but then you've got elders in the church, chief leaders who, this is what their people do, and you're in a church setting. How do you even begin to deal with that?
Okay, so just a question for you, and again, bear with me as we're just working this through together, right? So is there a way to talk to the, again, we're talking about culture change, ultimately, because that's where so how do we change culture? Can you start conversations with the pastors or the chiefs,
Yeah, the pastors know that this is happening. They've got elders in their church who are chiefs, who live in this community where this is what they do.
So
the chiefs are in the church. Yeah, the chiefs themselves are in church. They're elders in church.
Is there a chance that you can talk to the pastor about hey, what do you actually is it a thing that they're thinking about? Do you know what I mean? Because another 9-year-old is getting married, that's just par for the course. If no one's thinking about it, if no one's actually so can we have is it possible to have conversations about hey, so kids are getting married really young, girls are getting married really young here. Should that be normal within our church context? Is that a conversation that you can have? I don't know. Is it? I don't know. Okay.
Because it feels like for us, you're coming as an outsider, and poking into their business.
Yeah.
So there's.
Well, and that's also, that goes back to what Mesvin was saying, right? It's building the relationship so that you can say, hey, we now have a relationship. Can I talk to you about this? Can we have a conversation about this? And again, all of this not going to happen in a year. These are long-term, ongoing conversations. Yes.
Even on this context of building a relationship, that's very dangerous, especially in a community whereby the raping of children is normal on them, because I'm in a community. The children in our open schools are coming out from a community whereby they don't go to school. 1, 2, okay, they marry, children just marry. It's normal with them. It's not even normal. That is the expectation for a girl child to be married at around 12 years. Okay, so here you come as a teacher. Why? Because they don't go to school. As a teacher, you come as an outsider and they don't trust you in this community. 2, you come as a Christian. They are not Christians. They've got their own religion and their own beliefs. So if you come, we should be aware of this thing of relationships. If you're a man and you come to let's say a girl child has got a problem, the girl child comes into your office, just very innocent. If an elder man passing by see you with a girl child, even if the child was coming for something, they just detect you had something in common there. And you will be forced to marry that child. And words will be put in the mouth of that girl that there is something which you talked about to her. 1, 2, the kids in that community are so vulnerable. They've never been loved. They don't know what is love.
Yeah.
You understand? Because they are forced to go to. So if you touch a girl child, that means it's part of rape on them. Just to touch. So you will be in trouble because of touching that child. So especially with relationships, if you are a teacher or a Christian, try by all means not to go into contact with. If you are a male, look for a woman to be with you. Even if you are talking or you are counseling or you are doing what, there should be a female with you. If you are a female calling a boy child, there should be a male person with you. You understand? Because if you go to that community, with them, okay, let's say the students in our open schools, when they're talking about relationships, with them it's so funny. The child whom I know is pregnant, and that child is 11 years old. You understand? And I've got this boldness that I go to the family and I ask, and then they'll say, she had gone to draw water. Is it the water is somewhere? They saw the girl with the boy just talking. When she came back with a bucket of water, they said to her, go back to that boy and he's your husband. And they were not talking about any love or anything. Those are teenagers. But then the girl was forced to go and sleep at the boy's house. 2 minutes, she's pregnant and she's forced in this marriage. So it's a very hard, especially if you are a Christian coming to those communities, they don't trust you because they're trying to change something which has been there for ages, for years.
Yes.
You understand? So that's what I'm saying, that it needs all the trainings.
Thank you, Samantha. Like that, because I am a French American white Westerner. I don't have your experience. That's just how it is. And so your experience and your like that is what, like, we need this, and like that's why I'm here just saying, like, here are some ideas, and that's why you need to be the ones to do the actual training. Like, incorporate that into your training with your teachers. So talk about, okay, we're coming in as Christians, here are things to consider, here is how you form, like, so the principles, the concept still stands, right? The idea to form relationships with people, to then, like, to be able to kind of go in, build trust, and then start changing culture, that still stands. But the way that you're going to do that is going to look so different, and that's where you guys are going to come in. That is where you need to say, okay, here's how we're going to do this in this context. Here are things that you need to know. So say, okay, if you're working with a boy and you're a woman, you need to have a man present. If you're, all those contexts, saying, okay, in order to build appropriate and maintainable relationships with people, we need to be, planning, figuring out how to, how or if we communicate, expressly that we're Christian. Are we, how do we communicate that? What do we say? All of those things, so this is a broad, safe, I'm trying to give you the principles and the bare bones things that you can take, so that you can take these away, go back to your context and say, okay, we need to do some culture change. We need to build some relationships to do that. In order to do that, here's what we need to do. So there's still more work that needs to be done from you guys. I'm sorry to say, I don't know if you know, but when you came here, you signed up to a pretty big commitment. We're done, so.
Sorry, can I just ask, okay, so within the mission world I'm thinking of all the big SIMs, AIMs, I think for me, what is best practice on this African continent? You've had all these mission agencies serving within the continent. The problems have been the same for years. Is there any best practice on what this actually looks like for the African continent?
So
It's slightly off track.
Yes.
But way back at the start of the HIV/AIDS pandemic, we organized in Johannesburg training for 200 pastors on how HIV/AIDS spreads. And we went through all the theory, and they were all agreeing beautifully, this is a problem. We talked about having multiple partners and the issues around that, and they all nodded wonderfully. But on the last day, we held a service. And during the service, whatever happened, the Holy Spirit just came upon us. And 120 of the 200 pastors stood up and confessed that they were in a relationship with somebody other than their wife. But it took the Holy Spirit just to break that. And people were sobbing and confessing. But during the week, they all agreed, oh yes, we shouldn't be having double partners, we shouldn't be having relationships with more than one lady. Yeah, we agree. But it took the Holy Spirit just in that, I don't know what that says to you, but it's amazing.
We're talking practicals right now. We're talking practicals right now, right? But we can do nothing without God. Nothing. Like, we can work for years and years and years and nothing will change. Give me just one yes.
What's really hard in these contexts, and which is quite concerning, is the children still need someone to stick up for them. Like, even if as believers of Christ, if we're more concerned about the leaders of the community, understandably, in what it means to our faith, but we neglect the needs of the kids, I think that's really hard to wrestle with. But at this other end, like your example, and so I grew up in Yemen. So my first good friend got married at 10. So just so you know, her name was Razika, and she stopped coming to my house because she was the second wife of someone twice her, 3 times her age. So that was a context I grew up in, was this context. I also grew up in a culture where people brought stones to stone women who were pregnant in the soccer field that was about 400 meters from our house. So in that context, as I started to get older, I started to have conversations with young women about these things, how they felt about it, just starting to talk to them about it. And that brought places where I could talk to them about Christ, because Christ was so different, and he was so different than the religion and the culture they were a part of. I think what's hard with children, and I was a peer, so that was kind of different, right? Because I was their age. I think it's hard as a teacher because if the child will get sent out of the community, or if the child will get beaten even more, then if we tell them to come to us and tell them things that happened, like, we have to have a plan in place for how we'll respond, because if we don't, I think we can make the child feel even more vulnerable and possibly make them not just feel more vulnerable and threatened, but actually put them at more threat.
Yeah, and we were talking about that during the conference safeguarding session. And honestly, I think that you, within your context, with our help, we can partner alongside you and walk with you in this, but you need to develop a type of contingency plan for, okay, if a child does raise a concern, what is going to happen with that, and how are we going to respond, and how are we going to make sure that this kid is safe after they've raised this concern? Because we want them to feel safe to raise this concern, but then we need a contingency plan. And I can't write that for each of you right now, and I can't write that for each of you, period. Like, we need to do that as a together thing. I can give you my policy knowledge, my wording, legal, whatever, but you guys know your context. So yeah.
Yeah, also I think the issue of context should be an underlining thing that we have, and we can have something that is already that is drafted and used as a general guideline, but when it comes to actually, implementing this, even if it's in training our people on the ground or applying it ourselves, it's something that we should tailor-make to suit what is prevailing there on the ground. I'll give an example. It's not too long ago, about maybe a few months, 2 or 3 months ago. My wife and I, we were talking about incidents that were similar that rolled out like one after another within maybe a week or two, where in one of the neighborhoods where we stay, a young boy was sodomized, about 4 years old. And this boy was sodomized by, people, like neighbors. And those neighbors have been trusted, and you've created relationship, and you leave your child in their care when you're away from home for just a few hours. And after an investigation or how that was happening, it was discovered that there was an older brother in that home who was about 13, 14, who had a young brother. And so this older one was actually sodomizing the two and taught them to sodomize each other. And so there was all that going on. And so we began to become very, very sensitive to where we leave our children, and and overprotective. So these things are there with us, they are happening. The world is changing, whether for good or for bad, but the bottom and underlining factor must be that we should be preaching the gospel. In these situations, the key is the gospel. The key is people must know that God loves His creation, and that is wrong for us to mistreat the children. But how we do it also matters, whether through the church, to the leadership, or directly to the children. It matters. Let's be sensitive to how we do it, because we need to also protect these children. We need to protect the work that we are doing can also be jeopardized. And ourselves, we can endanger ourselves in some context where, like our brothers and some of our sisters here, if you begin to advocate against that directly, you begin to endanger yourself. So we have to be sensitive as how we go about it. We can have the guidelines, but we need to tailor-make them, break them down to suit these situations.
Yeah, and that's why, so when we make policy, even in Teach Beyond, our policy is principle-based. It's all because we cannot account for every single possible situation that will ever happen. And so even when I'm saying, maybe we need to create a contingency plan, that's going to be a broad thing. I don't think it's going to be, okay, this is exactly what's going to happen. It's going to be, okay, based on these principles, this is what we can do. These are some possibilities, or these are ideas. It's not that exactly that, and thinking about in your context, that's policy is hugely important to be consistent, to be legally compliant. It should also be principle-based and functional within your context, so that it shouldn't require you to be directly advocating for X, Y, Z, for the well-being of children, if it's going to put you in danger physically. That's right. So we need to make sure that that's not happening. So whatever your policy looks like, whatever organization you're with, we want to make sure that you're it works for you, and that's principle-based. Also, just a note on what Liz was saying, that she was talking to the people who were in the culture, right? She was talking to the girls about how they felt about it. And I don't know the responses that she got, but I bet that some of them probably aren't super happy about that. And so there are people within the culture who are probably hidden because they can't just come out and say, I hate this culture, but who are against these child marriages. So going back to your situation, right? There are probably people within that culture that you're going to who want things to change, and who are already in the culture and who are already insiders, who can start like moving that forward. But maybe they just need to get empowerment from someone like you. And I mean, obviously finding those people, that's a hard thing to do, but like trying to find those people who are going to be your kind of inside help, that's going to be hugely important and impactful.
It seems like this is such a great start, because if you're training the tutors, and if then you suddenly create a movement where there's people who are like, yes, I live in this context, I don't like it, this isn't right, yet, or actually, maybe it's the Holy Spirit putting things in their heart, like I've been a part of this, and then that slowly builds the momentum. That actually you have more people saying something about this doesn't seem right. And it seems like those conversations with adults, or even like information, like a community session where you want to teach some of these ideas and then have it open for discussion in a non-judgmental forum, like these are things we'd like to present, we'd like to discuss, then maybe you just start the conversations happening, and then maybe that slowly changes.
Exactly, it's starting. We are starting. We are not ending. In fact, we're going to need to continue going on. This is not like a single time thing. Like I said, when you joined, you're making a commitment. I'm sorry if you didn't know. Yes. Go ahead.
There's something that I wanted to, two things.
Yeah.
One is how we view children really dictates how we treat them.
Yes.
And for me it always seemed like, children are children. Till I participated in a program called Awana, and it focuses on children, sharing the gospel with them. And it was one of the first questions that was posed. How do you view children? I was surprised at the views in the room. And it just showed how children are viewed as slightly less of human beings. Slightly, or on the journey of being a human being. So, and that meant the way we look at them is going to be different. Probably you're going to eliminate the feelings, you're going to eliminate all these things that make us human, and then you treat them the way you treat them.
Yeah, and so that's why we have to start with, hey, this is why this is important. This is the biblical importance of children and why Jesus cares about. Or, the context, if they're not believers, here's why children are important. They are our future, and if they're not treated well, our future is going to look bleak, right? At the very least, right?
And then the point on the tutors. There's so many broken people in the world, and some are in this room. So, and then that affects how we treat others.
Yes.
People that are hurt are going to hurt other people. So it just keeps the ball rolling. I must admit that this training, I didn't expect it to start at this note, but it's a hard one for me to take. That I took my own best friend to police for this same issue, and we never got back. But the more I analyzed what caused her to do what she did to her child, it was what was done to her as a child. So she was just transferring the pain, the beating, the kicking out of the house. It was all because of what she went through as a child. And that was never dealt with. That today she has other children, and I don't think that there's any difference in the way she treats them. Or if there's a difference, it's because of fear. But that inner child in her that was hurt is just covered up in there and can explode anytime. So there's so much in our culture, there's so much with adults today that have not dealt with the pain of childhood, and now when they get children, that gets transferred to them. And that poses a challenge to tutors in here, that before we go out, the work starts with us.
Yeah, it does, exactly. Work starts with us, it does not end with us. This is so overwhelming, and there's just so much to think about and consider, and you're not alone in this, and God is ultimately the one who's going to bring about that change, and we ultimately cannot address every single adult who has been harmed in the past, who is now affecting children, that we don't have the capacity, unfortunately, even though we would love to. But God's restorative plan for us can do that for humans. Mitchell has been waiting.
I'll say again. But what I know is that God is able to change every situation.
Yes.
So in the context of with the children, I'm just saying we worked with volunteers, 40 volunteers in 5 wards amongst the Tonga people in Zimbabwe. When we first started, we were there with like 3 years with them. But in the space of 3 years, we've seen transformation take place in the community. So it wasn't so much just preaching the gospel, but teaching Christian ethics. And through ethics and values, the more we were teaching the volunteers that, the more they were grasping onto it. They were leaders in their community. But what happened is that after that, they went back into the formal school. So these are some of the solutions. Went back into the formal school, started programs that called Gem BEMS. They call them Gem BEMS. Okay, Gems had to do with the girl child, BEMS had to do with the boy child. And how do they handle the issues of their community? And so that was advocated by teachers, trained teachers, in order to reach the children. The children learned those things. This is my body. You know what I mean? And so they were taught, this is my body. I will not allow you to touch my body. And taught them the value of who they are in Christ and what God can do in their lives. And this thing went through all the schools amongst the Tonga schools, right through Binga. And you know, at the end, the tutors that were trained were the ones that advocated and went and took a stand in their community against child marriages, and began to say, and went to the chiefs, to the crow heads or the village heads, and said, we will no more allow this to happen for one goat. They would sell a child for one goat. And so what happened? The chief, the volunteers, the tutors brought the chief together with all the leaders. We sat on, we didn't know protocol when he comes, how we must stand or sit or whatever. We from Western world, you know what I mean? It was amazing. But you know what the chief said? And this is what he said: we will not allow child marriages to take place anymore in our district. Where did it start? With people talking on ethics. And we can make a difference. We can change a community through gospel ethics. They don't know that it's a scripture, but we share the gospel of Jesus Christ wherever we go, because that's the ultimate transformation. And you know what he says? If a girl is getting married at 9 or 12 years old, if she cannot take on, this is what his words, the chief, if she cannot take on the responsibility of a woman, she should not be married. If she cannot carry a 20 liter thing on her head, and she cannot go till the lands, then she should not be getting married. If she cannot, and she's not ready to have a sexual relationship with an old man, we will nullify that. And you know where it started? With a few people who changed the community. So I'm going to say to you, no matter what we go through, God is able, and just continue pressing in and see what God is able to do. Thank you.
I'm not nearly as inspirational, but that's what I'm trying to get at. Like, that's what we're getting at, right? Yes.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to share that Eric and I mostly teach men in the refugee community, and I was all of a sudden hit that, hey, these are the people we need to teach not to abuse children. So, and the other thing I just remembered, we adopted a girl who came out of sexual abuse. And you know, there's a chapter in Leviticus that most of us are kind of uncomfortable when you read it, because it mentions you can't have sex with this person, you can't have sex with this person, you can't have sex with this person. And she said, Mom and Dad, I like that chapter because it says in the Bible what is right and what is wrong, and it goes very specific. But I think for Eric and me, I was just convicted that, hey, well, not only can we teach them this is what the Bible says, but the truth is, if a woman in the refugee community says, this man attacked me and I want to press charges, that man can forget about resettlement. He's going to be sent right back to the hard situation he was at, the whole reason why he left. So if the Bible doesn't get them, I think that fear of that might.
Again, what's gonna motivate people? Like I know, like you know, use what you have available and think through this. And honestly, like if anything, I hope that today and tomorrow can just like start you guys thinking about these things and like really thinking through it in your context. I don't know that what we're giving to you is going to be like the most useful thing. Again, what I said, like you might need to scrap the whole thing and start, you know, and we want to walk with you through that. Like that's, so just to be clear, like that's what we're here for. Yes, Tori, sorry.
We had a situation in Ethiopia, the culture, it's okay to hit the children and things, and we had a child that was actually tied up by her father, so she couldn't go to school. It was a really rough situation, and she came and told the teacher, and then we did have a plan in place, and so we followed through. Nothing happened, you know, but I feel like it was still impactful because that child knows that there was 4 or 5 adults that were fighting for her, that did care, that listened, and that didn't say it, that said it wasn't okay, you know, so we don't know how that affected her heart, and that may be something she never forgets, even though her father wasn't, you know, punished like we would all have hoped, you know, at least she knows that all these people that she loves and knows loves her. It's not right.
Yeah, being an example of Christ in someone's life is always worthwhile. And like whatever that looks like that's a good thing. Okay, I have 5 minutes left, so I'm gonna turn it over to Dana because there's the Vegas lull.
And you've got a team.
I know.